But in the end, I must choose for me, I must make a choice. And growing up means accepting responsibility in a world that's very complex, in a world where problems are, especially as you get older, they become more and more just kind of, mind-boggling sometimes, But still, that doesn't relieve me of the responsibility of choosing. And I think I mentioned at the meeting that, on the Feast of the Mother of God each year, that is my prayer for the community, that people would grow up.
Hello and welcome to Chat CTK, a podcast exploring life and faith at Christ the King Catholic Church in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm your host, John Stotts, Director of Adult Faith Formation here at CTK, and in this episode, I'm joined by our pastor, Father Dexter Brewer, who recently led for us 2 Sunday morning adult education sessions focusing on conscience in Catholic teaching and practice. We talk about the importance of conscience, how to listen to that quiet voice within, and the struggles that Catholics often have over matters of conscience. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
For the past couple of weeks, we've been having some conversations at our adult education sessions about conscience. What have you noticed about these sessions? Has anything caught your eye? Or have you enjoyed being with the group?
Indeed, they are certainly lively conversations, which leads me to believe that these are things that people want to talk about, that they wanted to talk about for quite a while, if they haven't. And the exchanges, the feedback, the questions that arise, when people, after their little gatherings, have all been very, very interesting. And it gives you an idea of what people's minds and hearts are.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's been very fascinating, in fact.
How would you define conscience when you think about how you use it or where it comes up for you?
I would say, and of course, I don't know that any definition is going to be kind of dead on, spot on, but it is, for me, kind of the voice of God within, And as I said at our gathering, it is not so much something that we learn as, at least in my judgment, something that we remember. I think it's kind of the learning to listen to God is something that I think kids do fairly naturally. There is an original innocence that's there that over the course of time and living, I think is covered over by society's issues and values and a host of other things. And then the conscience comes and reminds us, I think, the whisperings of God, what it means to be human, what it means to be connected to God, what it means to do good and avoid evil. Which I think, as I said, I think we know. I'm not a philosopher, but I suspect we know that when we're young, So conscience is that whispering within, which moves us toward the good, rather than that which is evil.
So, as you say, it's something that we remember. It's not something that not a skill necessarily that we refine over the course of time.
There's that passage, that we have at the Sunday liturgy from time to time, and it always moves me. And I forget, it's a first reading, I think, and it talks about how this, which you ought to know, you don't have to go to the moon to get it, or to the farther reaches of the earth. It's as close to you as your own heart.
Yeah.
And it's probably speaking about wisdom, but wisdom, conscience, and in some ways they're very similar. So that's what I'm speaking.
For a natural tendency, we disagree a lot. If conscience is something we have from childhood and it gets covered over and we uncover it, nevertheless, even among Catholics, there can be some significant disagreements, which I think we've uncovered some in our sessions where we've used some fact patterns, some case studies to look at some moral dilemmas. And people often come down on very different sides of an issue. Do you think this is a difference between people who have a conscience and people who don't?
No, I think we all got consciences, Joe. Our conscience can be formed by so many things. I was reading an article a few weeks ago before we began this series, and I could only read part of the article because the rest of it wasn't available. But there was a professor who put it out there, whether the Nazis had a conscience, and she suggested that contrary to what people believe, they did. It was formed by the community, by everything they were hearing and they were reading, and a host of other things. But their actions, there were many who would have thought that their behaviors, the things that they did, were consistent with the whisperings of God within. I would say that that's poorly formed, and that the conscience was wrong.
Yes,
because the conscience can be wrong. But they do have consciences, what they believe to be the whisperings of God, which makes it a very tricky thing because, knowing what to listen to and what is moving one toward the good and away from evil can be tricky, a tricky thing. We had the problem of the gentleman who executed the 4 to save the many, the 36 others, and in his mind, he may think that it's the whisperings of God telling him, that if we can save some, that's a good, and maybe that's the greatest good. But then we have principles which tell us that and the direct taking of innocent human life is never permitted.
Yeah.
So if one's conscience is telling us to do something contrary to that, then I would probably relook at my conscience or wondering what exactly it is I'm listening for. Listening to.
Have you ever encountered someone who sort of clearly understood what their conscience was telling them and chose to do the other thing?
I think people do that all the time.
Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can see it when people approach marriage, the relationships that they have thought about, and because the whisperings don't stop, they have an idea what they ought to do, but because of the forces outside, because this train is already going, it's moving toward a destination, then they must continue to ride the train, But they have been, I've spoken to people who said, yeah, I mean, everything within me said, this is not for you,
Yeah.
This is not the good.
Yeah.
But they chose to do the other thing, mostly to please someone else. And I'm sure there are 100,000 other examples outside of marriage, but I know that's one that comes up a lot.
Yes. So do you think that the gravest temptation to conscience is often what others expect of us, and,
absolutely,
and the standards that are set by others?
Yes, right. And the pain that may come if I choose to follow what I believe to be the right thing, and that right thing, or what that is, seems to conflict with what those around me, those who love me, or maybe not love me, and want me to do. And we do want to avoid pain.
Yes. Yes.
So.
And yet we also look to people to show us how to live and how to act. We go to trusted friends and confidants with moral dilemmas to work it out. How do you get through that narrow road of, on the one hand, not just capitulating to what people expect of you, but also not simply going your own way and ignoring the advice of others where that advice may help you?
Right, and you do. I mean, the community is, I think, essential in in both the formation of conscience and also in helping us to discern kind of what it is. So we must listen, and that the dialogues with friends and with community, those are essential. But in the end, after all that's happened, I must, within kind of the silence, within the relationship that I have with God, I have to weigh all those things and then discern what is that whispering moving. What is the good, and how is it moving me? The choice must be mine, and I must choose it. And I think I often know when I'm choosing for or against, that deep and abiding sense of God within.
Yes.
And if I'm unsure, but I want to do what is right, then of course you're fine, right? Because life's complicated, right? And the best we can do sometimes is to do the best we can do.
Yes,
we can. Right? Yes.
There's a passage in the Catechism and its discussion of conscience, which is sort of marked in its contrast from some of the more some of the legalistic language of what we should do and what we shouldn't do, that talks about how without sufficient interiority, without the interior space to listen to God, we simply can't follow our conscience if it's too noisy.
That's right. And that's the purpose of a seminary when it comes to moving to a priesthood. The seminary is a place where we, among other things, we put aside a lot of the noise of the world, parents, friends, all those things. And we attempt to listen, outside all that racket, to what's really going on within. First, who are you? And it's hard to discern that sometimes when we're in the midst of the throngs telling us who we are, or who they think we ought to be, or who we are. But then from that silence has to come a sincere choice. Yeah, I want to do this because I want to do this.
Yes.
Not because anyone else wants me to do this, or because someone else believes I ought to do this, but I ought to do this, but because the deepest parts of my being say that this is what would lead me to the fullest expression of myself, before God. So, but too often what happens, I think, in seminary is because the carrot is so, to many, what's the word I'm looking for?
Appetizing.
Yeah, if carrots can be, I hate carrots. But yeah, then it is tempting not to enter into that silence, and just to, in fact, to push it away so that you can keep your focus on the carrot, and it doesn't matter what anyone's saying, what the whisperings within are saying, because all that's far too frightening. If the whisperings within are saying, this is not for you, find another road, then that's terrifying. And so you ignore that because the carrot is more secure. It's there are all kinds of things about it that are delightful to know. Its position, its power, all those things, and so not heeding that, I think, often turns into a life that's pretty dismal.
Sticking with the carrots for a moment, as a priest, as a pastor, people do come to you for input, for advice. You have a lot of power, symbolic and otherwise. If you say something is so, many people will believe that it's so, whether or not it is. This can also lead people astray sometimes. And yet, as you describe sort of the need for silence, if it's not the ability to tell people what's right and what's wrong, or to be a certain persona in a community, why else be a priest? what would the voice of silence in the silence say if it's not for those things, not for the carrots?
Yeah, I don't think we're here to direct people's lives. That's not my vocation. My vocation is as best I can and perfectly for sure is to mirror Christ in my life, and to share with people, over these 66 years of life, what I have come to know about God. They, as I've often said, may know something else and other things about God that I don't know. But this is what I know. When people come to me or to any priest really with some sort of conundrum, I think we have something of we should have kind of a pulse of the values of the community, and where the church has been, what the community asks of us. And those are the things that we impart, that we share with them. Ultimately, of course, whatever the decision is, it's not for the priest to make, and it is important, I think, for the priest to be accurate and kind of espousing what it is the church wants of us. Some years ago, I was on a boat in Paris after with some friends, and it was our last night there. We were having dinner. I think I told this story once at Mass. And I was sitting at a table of 10 people, mostly from Paris. There were a couple from the States, I think. But we were chatting, and at one point, one of the ladies at the table next to me, there were 10 of us, she turned to me and she said, "What do you do?" And because I know that often, saying that you're a priest brings up conversations that when I'm away, I don't want to get into. But on that particular day, for some reason, it was probably the Spirit in some ways, led me to say I'm a priest. And at that moment, everyone stopped talking at the table, and one by one, each of the other 9 people at that table began to talk about things that priests had told them that I knew as a priest simply weren't so. They're probably the priest's particular way of seeing things, or his particular spirituality, or something. But in each case, it was hurtful, and not one person, not one of the other 9 people there, since those events in their lives had even darkened the doors of a church.
Wow. It is power indeed, I suppose.
It is, unfortunately.
Do people come to you looking for instructions on what to do? I mean, you've described sort of a consultative role that you would prefer to have. Do people
They do,
want you to tell them?
But I don't. I don't bite that carrot.
Okay.
Right.
Has that always been your way, or did you learn not to do that?
Did you know when I was a young priest? I remember many years ago, 35 years ago or so, I often became really anxious if I had a meeting with someone where I knew there were difficult issues, either to sort or to solve, and I would, and it was very bothersome for me. But then at some point, I forget when it happened, I realized that I don't have to fix this or solve it or give an answer that's, ultimately people are responsible for their own lives. We as a community support people, but I can't, they shouldn't replace their judgment with mine, And when I realized that I didn't need to solve these things or give, the ultimate answer to the conundrums of life, then meetings have become, really pleasant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember early on in my time here, at the time I was responsible for the marriage ministry, and had met with a couple who had been married for a year or two who were really struggling because I had some experience in some forms of counseling. I had agreed to meet with them, and we talked, and it became clear over the course of those meetings that they were really not happy. And as a result of those decisions, they decided to divorce. And I remember coming up to your office, and I typed out the case, sort of verbatim style. I was very nervous. And I gave it to you. I'm sure you don't remember this at all. And you kind of thumbed through it and just looked up at me and said, what is this? And I described what had happened, and was ready to offer my resignation. I met with this couple and they decided to split up. I failed, I failed to keep them together. And you just looked at me and you said, "Oh, John, you can't fix people." And you said it with such compassion and some of the freedom that you've just described. And it really shook me a bit. I thought, what am I here for if not to fix people? But sort of mulling over that over the years, almost like a Zen koan, it's true. We can't fix people, and we can't take their agency. Even telling them what to do can be dangerous, because we can tell them what to do, but not why to do it, or how to do it, or what to aim for.
But not only that, if the choice for good is not theirs, but ours, if it's not in fact the good, and that's always a possibility, then we are blamed for it. I mean, Father told me to do this, or John told me to do this. John is, he directs these things. He knows this stuff.
Right.
No, I think we need to leave people's lives to them. We offer what we have, but they must choose, because it's the choice that makes us who we are, right?
Do you ever struggle to witness someone making what is clearly the wrong choice?
All the time.
And you just see the consequences in it?
Yeah, right.
How do you sleep at night?
Oh, very easily. I try to stay in my lane. And but I think it's just a part of life. And the world's not going to come to an end, quite frankly. Not over these things. And we get all excited about the choices sometimes that we have to make in life. But I think with some perspective, you realize that it'll be all right. I think what is most important is the desire to do good and to avoid evil. And even though, as I said earlier, even though we may not know for certain, kind of which road that is, and the struggle itself is a prayer. Help me with this, because if you leave me alone with this, this is to God, who are whispering with, to within, then I'll probably mess it up.
Yeah. Okay. There's a moral theologian at Boston College, James Keenan, who, in his reflections on what's sort of the first precept of the moral law, you must do good and you must avoid evil. He talks about how, for him, the fundamental decision is whether to care or not. And that, if we make up our minds simply to care about the good, and especially about the good as it presents itself to us in daily life, then, like you're saying, even when we make mistakes, we don't get that far off. It's when we make the decision not to care, or we fail to care, that, moral hazards really appear.
Because the decision not to care, however that's manifest, is really kind of a decision to break with the Spirit, to break with any whisperings within, as it were.
Right.
So you may happen on the right decision, but it's not because of whisperings within, because you've separated yourself from compassion.
Yes.
And
the great example of this for me, and I think Keenan uses this example as well, as the parable of the Good Samaritan, where Jesus, paints three pictures of people, two of whom pass by this person on the road and they simply don't care. But the religion tells them, right? I mean, some of them, they don't care. But I was thinking about the very thing today in the shower. They pass him up because to touch him or to do something for him might in some way negatively affect them, right? Yes.
The first two anyway. But this is one of the brothers. He's Jewish.
Right. He's a Samaritan.
The guy on the ground is not a Samaritan.
Oh, you're correct. Yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. So two Jewish guys pass by. They're whatever their rules, their religion, their something, the purity laws say, no, you can't help this guy. So they've decided because of their, because of the rules that they can't help.
Yes.
I don't know. I mean, were you getting at, I don't know if they have decided not to care just outside of that, but it seemed to me, but I mean, I could be wrong. It seemed to me that it was, one's a Levite, one's a
priest. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And they had things to do, which, should they touch this man, if he's dead, for example, that's a problem. If he's got blood on it, that's a problem.
Sure.
Then whatever it is they are about to do or need to do, it may be difficult for them to do if they cared, so they can't care. That's where I read it. So
to my mind, and maybe this is also what you're saying, it almost seemed as though the decision not to care preceded their interpretation of the law, so that they used the law as a pretext to justify the decision
not to stop,
not to stop, right, and not to care. Whereas if the priority is care for the other, if priority is compassion, and that is the frame through which we read everything, read the law, then to some degree, it doesn't matter what the law says.
That's right. That's exactly right. I think you're right there. Yeah. I think that's right. I think you're right. The decision not to care must have come first.
Right.
And then we often will use whatever it is that will justify my decision that I've already made, right, to not act.
Which goes back to where you started in the beginning, that, conscience is primordial, right? It's something we remember. It's something that belongs to children. Before we learn the rules and the law, there is caring about someone,
right,
and usually it's in our own inner circle, and right, we expand that circle, but it's caring about others that gets eroded over time by obligations, by pressures, and even care for ourselves. You describing, people making decisions against their conscience as they prepare to marry someone whom they don't really want to marry, is a failure of a sort of self-care. They're
absolutely,
and ends up betraying the other and their community. But so concern, the sort of fundamental caring here doesn't just involve the other. It means showing up for everyone. When people come to you with matters of conscience, are there things that are commonly brought up over and over that people tend to struggle with?
I think if there's a category, it would be relationships, whether they be family relationships or some sort of relationships in community. One that I've dealt with a lot, for example, is what do you do with a member of the family who is who seems to have lost his or her way, and for the longest time, and no matter what you do, they either seem to they don't seem to be getting any better, and getting a handle on life, and yet they're burning through other people's wealth and those things. Do you leave them alone? Do you what do you do with these people? That comes up a lot. But there's probably no one kind of thing that comes up. I mean, but generally about relationships.
Yeah. As we wrap up, one of the things you said last Sunday that I think stuck with a lot of people is that one of the things you try to convey and wish people would understand is that they need to grow up. What do you mean when you say that Catholics need to grow up?
Many years ago, again, when I was as a young priest, I was in a meeting with a woman, and I forget what exactly the issue was. She was, I'm sure there was some choice that she was having to make or something, but it was. And at the end of the conversation, something moved me to say to her. I think she asked me, what should I do? And I said to her, you need to grow up. And you would have thought, from the look in her face, that I'd stabbed her in the chest.
Wow.
Again, I can't remember what it was, but to my mind, in that moment, that is what she needed to hear, to know. So when often over the last many years of priesthood, people have come, and whether I say it that like that or not, what I'm thinking is, you just need to grow up, And what I mean is, stop kind of pushing away the responsibility of choosing in your life. And stop trying to put the responsibility of choice on someone else, whether it be your priest or your spouse or someone. Again, all those voices make for a better choice, I think, if we listen to them. But in the end, I must choose for me. I must make a choice. And growing up means accepting responsibility in a world that's very complex, in a world where problems are, especially as you get older, they become more and more just kind of, mind-boggling sometimes, But still, that doesn't relieve me of the responsibility of choosing.
Yeah.
And I think I mentioned at the meeting that, on the Feast of the Mother of God each year, that is my prayer for the community, that people would grow up.
This flies in the face of one variant of Catholicism that a lot of people live with, which is that we ought to strive not to be in tension with the church's rules and prescriptions. That if there is tension between how I perceive the church wants me to act and how I think I should act, that there's something wrong with me, and that the best place to be is where, we don't really have to wrestle at all, because we're simply doing what the church says, and there's a freedom in that.
I think for the most part, most people, most of them were not in tension with, with what the good, or what the church considers the good, right? I mean, it's only when we come to that place in life where there's some sort of crossroad, but it doesn't happen every day, I don't think, generally. But yeah, I think if we are always in tension with the church and its values, then we probably would go someplace else.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then, like I said, from time to time, it arises that because of my history, or because of something, because of my own, the whisperings within, I feel tension with this, particular thing. And that's legitimate, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
My experience may be different than yours, but I tend to interact with a lot of people who feel in tension with the church.
Always.
A lot, all the time. They have a gay child, and they attended their wedding, and they heard from someone that they shouldn't do that, or they don't go to Mass every Sunday, and they know they should, or they are, a couple who is. But
let's look at that, though. I mean, someone who doesn't go to Mass every Sunday but know they should. What does that mean? So they. I mean, that's one of the precepts. Join the community to celebrate. So the tension comes. I mean, there's no bad in going to Mass, right?
Right.
So I'm not sure what the problem there is. I mean, so is it that a person feels guilty for not doing what they believe they ought to be doing, in which case they simply ought to do it?
Okay.
I remember a professor in law school once. He said, he was also my mentor and spiritual director, and he said something, and he said, if you're doing that, then don't do it.
Yeah.
He was just very blunt about it.
Yeah. But say it's to make it more concrete, say it's a parent who's married to a non-Catholic and just tries to get to church but doesn't want to drag the kids, or that there are circumstances that make it difficult, and she knows she ought to be going, but just seems to fail, not sort of flippantly, but and experiences that as a tension with what she knows she ought to be doing and what she is in fact.
But she gets there sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think God understands that.
Okay.
Right. And the tension that she feels is kind of part of what it means to be human.
Okay.
Right.
I mean,
but it doesn't mean there's any fault. I mean,
yes.
she's doing the best she can.
So then, to your mind, there's a distinction between feeling that tension and feeling and being at fault.
Wrong. Right. Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the ability to discern that may be part of what it means to form your conscience, to not interpret every sense of tension as I'm bad.
That's right.
But rather to use it.
This matters to me.
Right. And this matters to me. And then from there to decide with the help of others.
I care.
I care. I care about going to Mass. I also care about maintaining this.
Right. That's right.
And then putting those in tension.
That's right. And that's going to cause tension.
Yes. And then I suppose we decide it's difficult to care about lots of things all at once, and I cannot care about any of them perfectly, but I'm trying.
Yeah. Even a computer can't. Right? No.
This is true.
It's the Y tube, It can only deal with one thing at a time.
Yes. So, well, computers have multiple processors now, and they can. But we do not.
That was back in the day when I was an undergrad.
Yes. Yeah. Anything else you want to share? This has been a rich conversation. Anything else you want to leave with folks as we're wrapping this up?
Not a thing.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming back, and look forward to talking again in the future.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Chat CTK, a podcast exploring life and faith at Christ the King Catholic Church. This podcast is written, directed, and recorded by John Stotts. CTK parishioner Brian Steinberg graciously donates his time to edit and produce the podcast. You can find new episodes at ctk.org/chatctk, or you can subscribe to it using Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app.